Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and perhaps even good evening. Thank you so much for dropping by and joining me for another exciting In the Studio stream with Daz 3D. Wonderful to see so many people in the chat. It is fantastic turnout. Thank you for being here. My moderators today are indeed spaghetti. My moderators today are Mr. Brian, aka Zero Calvin. Wonderful to see you. Mr. Dragonate, aka Nate, and Miss Julia. Hello, hello. The three of them will work with me to answer, or you not so much answer your questions, but collate your questions into a little thing I can have a look at. So if you do have questions during the stream, then please don't be afraid to ask them. I will either catch them while you say them, but sometimes I get so caught up in what I'm doing that I see the chat whizzing by and I don't have time to respond. So at that point, my friendly moderators will catch them out and they'll try their best to help you with any technical issues that you may be having. Today, we're going to have a look at how to adjust clothing in situ in Daz Studio. And that's a bit of a difficult, tricky topic to get into. And I hope I'm going to try to do my best to show you a few examples here. Maybe we'll start with a little bit of music before I go and have a little presentation for you, because it takes a long time to change scenes. I thought I'm going to record this here as a little video. So this is something we're going to do, a skirt that we're going to go and flare out. This is a fairly easy adjustment that you can make. But rather than that being a generic adjustment, I'll talk more about this, we can do this in a per scene, like in a per situ basis. We're going to have a look how to do this in Hexagon. We can also do something more along the lines of this, so we can go and make it longer. That is something that could be said as a generic morph. That can be, that could be part of clothing, but sometimes it isn't. So at that point, we can make that happen. So easy thing to do that in Hexagon, and of course, Hexagon is completely free and well integrated. Other changes that we can make is something that's more in situ. So if we had a pose and we wanted to do something like this, take the bra strap down. We can do that in Hexagon as well, so that's fairly easy. And the cool thing about this is we can do this without destroying the materials or the rigging in the Daz figures. So we'll do this with morph targets, and I'll talk more about this. So those are all things that we can do in Hexagon, which is nice. Then there's something else that we can do with sculpting tools, and that's where ZBrush and Blender come in. So you see this kink underneath George's breasts here. George is a heavy guy, and Daz Studio is trying its best to kind of shrink wrap the shirt around his body when there's extreme morphs around. And that often doesn't look quite nice, so we can help that out by smoothing that out. I'll show you how to do that. Very nicely done. There's something else that we can do. We can pull up clothing. So sometimes you might have something where you need to have a bit of skin exposed, or somebody is pulling at something and you need to go and make some adjustments to that. And that is also possible with ZBrush or Blender. So I'll show you how to do this with both things. Notice how groovy those little wrinkles look. So not only is this pulled up, so that's one thing, but there's also additional cloth wrinkles that have appeared here. And that is also something that we can do with ZBrush, as well as Blender. So one's slightly easier than the other, but I will show you both options so that you know what's what. And of course, Blender is completely free. Latest version has come out this week. I think a couple of days ago, Blender 3.2 is now the latest version. Another example of smoothing is something that you may come across if you auto-fit clothing. So this is a custom character here, just in an A pose. And if you look at this was a Genesis 8 male shirt that I fitted to the female. And that looks pretty terrible. If I go into wire texture shaded, you can see how the geometry distorts here on her breasts. And there's lots of little, scrunches that have happened here. And that is something that we can go and even out with a morph that I've already prepared. So I'm going to show you just the effect of that. I got as a disclaimer, two disclaimers actually. I really am not very good at doing this, so I hope you have much more talent than I do. I'm more like the technical guy who can make something like this happen, and that looks much better. Still isn't perfect. There's still a lot of sculpting knowledge that you need to have in order to make that look much better, but this terrible, not borderline usable, actually not really usable, and this one very much usable, so that's kind of nice. So I've done a couple of things here. I've done the smoothing, but I've also done the making sure that the faces don't quite distort through the auto fitting process. Some distortions happen that we don't really like, so I'll show you how to do some of these things. But in the basic principle is that we don't, for these things to happen, we don't export the clothing and then re-import it straight as an object, because that would destroy the materials, potentially material zones, and it would take the rigging away, and that's a problem. So what clothing creators do is, when you look through your favorite items of clothing, there's often these dials in there, and they're different on a per clothing basis. So there might be something in which you can do adjustments on one item of clothing that the other item of clothing doesn't have, and that's because each of these things are created from scratch by the clothing creator. And the good news is I can show you how to do it so that you can do this yourself on a per situ basis. So if you have a figure that isn't in the A pose and you have somebody standing or sitting and you think, yeah, well, you know, I really need my clothing to behave differently right here, then you can make that happen. Or maybe somebody's pulling at a tablecloth and you need something to lift up, but there's no morph for that. I can show you how to make that happen. So there we go. Ill-conceived. I'm trying to catch up on the chat. Righty, so let me go and show you this on an extremely simple example. Before we start with the Genesis character, let's have a look at how this works between Daz Studio and Hexagon. So you need to have a 3D modeling application to make that happen, and it can be of your choice. So Hexagon is free and it's available from the friendly Daz people. Let me go and show you where that is. I believe you own it already. You can go and just try to search for Hexagon. And here it is. That's the one. If it's not already in your account, you may have to go and just add it to your card. It's a free application that you can grab and then install, and then set it up so that Daz Studio can launch it. And once you do that, it'll kind of work a little bit like this. So if I go and create myself a new primitive for now, and I'll maybe use a sphere, 1 meter sphere, maybe with 100. Well, let's say 48 and 48 segments and 48 sides. There we go. Let's give that color, just so that white on gray doesn't quite look that nice. Let's do something like that. And so if this is an object or an item of clothing, we'll talk about that in a second, all you'd have to do is head over to File, Send To, and then use Hexagon. So Hexagon is integrated with Daz Studio in that we can almost do this in a single click. So once you do that, Hexagon opens up, and then you can go and make adjustments in this object. And then once you're done, you can bring it back, and Daz Studio will then have it inside. So I'll show you more about how to do this, what the controls are and all that. But if I go and make this, just make a little bulge that comes out of here, like so, and maybe just like, you know, something silly, maybe just like this and that. But that's perfect. That's a change that we wanted to make. And if you had multiple objects in your scene, you'll see them here as well. So you'd have the Genesis figure as well as clothing, and we'll look at that in a second. Then you go and head over back to File, Send to Daz Studio, where a dialog pops up that lets you give it a funky name. So you've got to open that here, and rather than calling it Hexagon, I'm going to call it a joke morph, just because, you know, that's what it is. And then in here, usually all you need to say is reverse deformations. In most cases, it doesn't hurt to say it all the time, so you're good, and hit OK. And then you should see this message, created morph successfully. And so this is essentially a plugin that's inside Daz Studio. It comes with Daz Studio. It's called the Morph Loader, and it is something you don't have to install. It's just there, and you can use it standalone, and Hexagon and ZBrush kind of make use of that under the hood. So, but we don't see a change here in the scene. So if you go and head over to your parameters tab and you select the item that you've just made that morph on, you can see this one here, Hexagon Bridge, and there's the joke morph. And if I crank that up, I can see that the change is now happening inside Daz Studio. And that's really all there's to it. And this is how we can make sure that I haven't imported or changed the object. It retained its material properties. Everything else was also retained, that like rigging and anything, you know, the figure was wearing X, Y, and Z items, and all of those were retained, and you just added a slider that works in this particular pose in this particular scene. You can dial that into the negative as well. That doesn't always work, but by default that is enabled. So in order to disable that, we need to go and just tell the slider properties under parameter settings that maybe we don't want this to go into the minimum. So set that to 0, hit accept, and then it can only go into the positive. And that's really all there's to it in principle. And you do that with Hexagon as well as ZBrush, because both of these are integrated with Daz Studio. But for external applications, we need to export this file manually, then import it again as a morph target. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Oh, Pale Moon, I didn't know that. Hexagon is not available for Macs, really? Could it be that for the later ones, Hexagon does not currently work on Mac Catalina? Could be that I remember having it on my Mac, so one of those things. I remember having that. Hexagon, so the thing is, Hexagon has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit because it hasn't seen an update in many years, but that's not really that big a problem because it still works for stuff we genuinely want to do. Sometimes it has issues. For example, if there's a, what's it called? If there is a geoshell in your scene and you try to send something over to Hexagon, that might cause a crash. Is this my PM coffee mug? Asked Yoshi. No, this is actually the official Chris Cox coffee mug. Chris uses my mug, I use his mug, so there we go. For free modeling apps, what would you suggest for character morphing? I would probably suggest ZBrush for that spooky. That's probably what I would suggest. Let's see how this works in situ. Let me go and start with a gray character here, so that we can put an item of clothing on it, and I'll show you how to make a quick change in just a regular shirt. Let me see if we can find something that's actually made for Genesis 8, just so you can see the basic principles. Let me say this one here from this one, yeah, maybe that one. Yeah, D-Force summer dress. So you can do this with or without D-Force. You can use D-Force before or after an adjustment. That is, both of these things work fine. So like in this case, let's see how we can maybe make the skirt a little bit longer. Let's turn it into a knee-length dress. And I'll just use the A pose here, but I'll show you post versions later on. So the important part before you send it over to Hexagon is that you need to select the base figure here. So don't just send the dress over. If you do that, then only the dress arrives and not the figure. So you want to do that so that you can model around it. So file send to Hexagon. And if it's open, then it will just go and load items into the scene. There we go. Now we can go and start working on this. So Hexagon looks a little intimidating, much like any of these 3D packages, but it's don't worry about figuring out everything in this app. All we really need to understand is how to switch from one object to another and how to make a geometric change, really. And all the other things like building things from scratch, don't really worry about that so much. So navigation in the interface, Alt left click anywhere in the viewport, and that'll rotate around your object. Hold down Alt and then left click. That'll work. You can also use these items on the bottom here, and I don't really tend to do that, but yeah, Alt left click to rotate around. Then you have Alt right click to pan this around. So that's Alt left click to rotate, Alt right click to pan, and then your mouse zooms in, and it behaves a little weird and unintuitive if you use it for the first time, because it zooms into the position where your mouse is currently on the viewport. So if I do that here, then my figure seems to disappear. But once you understand that principle, it's actually fairly simple to go, I must position my mouse over where I'd like to zoom in, and then it'll kind of go and work. So that's kind of the first hurdle there. The second hurdle is, well, how do I how do I make changes to things? So if you're familiar with Blender, you may know that there is something called object mode and edit mode. Edit mode is the thing in which you make geometric changes. Object mode is where if you had two objects in your scene, you move them around. And Hexagon kind of seamlessly thinks about this as well. There's these icons here at the top, and they will let you do something similar. The first one is in fact object mode, so you can go and move objects around. We don't really need that, but that's kind of the basic mode that you should return to before you send changes back to Daz Studio. The next three are the selection mode. So this one would be like the face selection mode, and this one is the edge selection mode, and this one is vertex selection. So depending on what you need to select, in what we do, it's usually face selection or edge selection. It's very rare that we make changes with vertex selection, but it'll really depend on the situation there. Before we can make such selections on our geometry, we need to go and select the item that we want to change. So in our case, it's the dress. So either in object mode, select that dress. See, now it turns on the wireframe here. Or if I select my Genesis figure to make a morph or a change on the figure, it'll do that. You can also use the little scene menu here. It's like an outliner. So you go and you can select your object from here. So in my case, it's the summer dress. And then in order to make the dress a little longer, I'll probably select all the polygons on the bottom here, so that edge loop. So I'll select my edge tool here, edges, and then I'll go and select any of these on the bottom here. That's just one. And that'll usually come up just with one. And if you move one edge, it'll do this, and that's really not what we want. Same happens with faces. If I go and grab a face to make an adjustment, it'll go and just move that one face. So usually what we want to do is switch on this magic thing called soft selection, and Hexagon has that over here. If you select that, you can see all these little red dots coming up here. Oops. All these little red dots coming up here, and when you change the radius, that's essentially the area of influence that you adjust here. So if I had some poke through here that I wanted to change, like say on a butt or something, so there's some poke through here, I would go and select one face and then go and change the radius so that I have a few more polygons, and then just left click and drag that cloth out. And if that's too much, Control Z to undo that. Just grab a larger area. Let's go and do this. So that's a quick way of fixing poke through. That way you just go around and say, okay, that needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed. And you can make it as small or as little as you want. So then with this soft selection, coming back to the bottom of the skirt here, if I go and select one edge down here, like this one, I can tell Hexagon to use the whole loop if it can do that by pressing L. And then it's selected everything that's in blue here on the bottom. Switch soft selection off just so that you can see that it's selected this whole ring at the bottom here. And now you can go and basically drag that out like, whoops, like so. Would be bad because it doesn't have soft selection on it. But with soft selection, it'll go and expand this whole area and just pull that whole area out like so. Maybe make that a little larger, like so. And then go and left click and drag this down. And that's another good way for us to fix some poke through here that we need to probably take care of. Now notice that when I do that, you may run into the issue that some of the polygons might distort. So you might see something like stretching in the pattern, and you can go and combat that by using the scale manipulator here. I'll show you there we go. See, this is something that now kind of shifts undistorts the polygons to a certain extent, like so. So it's kind of a nice way to use these in conjunction. If this is hard to see, which, you know, for me it is, there are some things that I'll show you about the manipulator, how we can isolate that. So for one, we can go and just use the scale manipulator in isolation. That's just this one. This one's the combined one here, universal. This one's the rotate one, if you just want to see the rotations here. We'll talk about that when it comes to flaring the skirt out. And then there's this one here, the translate manipulator. So that's just the arrows. Now, before I fix this here, let me go back into face selections and show you a little more about the manipulator. So if I select one face over here, and I'll switch soft selection off for now, I can also go and draw here. So left click and drag and basically paint multiple faces in. That's also possible. You can also right click and then go and either make a marquee selection. That's with the right click. Also took me a while to figure that out. There's also a way to use lasso selection at this one here, polygon lasso. So if I switch that on, right clicking will now draw a lasso that'll select multiple polygons here. Front and back. So paint selection doesn't do that, but this lasso selection does that. So if I select one face or multiple faces, notice how the manipulator is facing. Currently it's facing the correct way, namely towards the normal surface. So I can go left click and drag this out and it goes out where it should be. If I go and move this guy over the other side, like here, it'll move the correct, it'll show the correct way as well. So it always points out towards where the normals are facing. If you want to make a change and your manipulator doesn't look like that, it might be that up here it's not set to selection. I think by default it's set to world, and that means no matter where I put my manipulator, it'll always point the same way. So no matter where the normal is oriented, it'll always point the same way, and that's not always what we want. So like on my skirt, I could have used that because it would just point down. That's kind of, that would have worked, but for something like if I wanted to fix the poke through on her hips here, that wouldn't really work. So be aware of that. Change that from world usually to selection, I'd say. Okay, so let's go, and the length is okay, but then, you know, something on her butt isn't good. So we can go and either use the regular face selection and select something here. This is now selected underneath the Genesis figure, so it's still only using the dress here with a bit of soft selection, with a bit less soft selection here perhaps. We can go left click and drag that out. Maybe that was a bit too much. The smoothing modifier in Daz Studio is also gonna take care of some of these things. This is how you could solve it. You could solve it differently because it's a relatively symmetrical garment. I don't know if it's how symmetric it is. Let me go undo all of that. You could also use edge selection again and say, well, maybe I'll go and grab an edge here and press L again. That'll loop this, or press this thing here. That's the same thing, L or loop, to make that selection, and then just go scale that up. So that's also possible in kind of all directions here, or in fact just into the, yeah, see, now I can probably do with a world rotation or world orientation here, like so. So then I can go and scale this out just a bit, like so, and like that. Or I could have probably used the yellow thing in the middle. Kind of depends how you feel. I might just use the faces here. I'll talk about symmetry in a moment as well, by if you had something that requires a change on both sides. So if you had something like a sleeve, you can make the adjustment twice, or you can just make it once, and then just let, if the garment is symmetrical, you can let Daz Studio kind of take care of importing this on both sides. So no matter if you do this in situ or in the A pose, in situ, like in your post version, you'll be able to really reap the benefits on this and go to town. Take some time making this look pretty if it was a, you know, if it was a post figure. And then just bring this back into Daz Studio. Let's do that. Let's do that before we flare that out, just as a little exercise here on the bottom. Okay, once we're done, I usually tend to go back into object mode, do this, and then head over to File, Send to Daz Studio. And here we get that familiar dialog again, in which we can go and name our morph. You can do that afterwards as well, but when you do it, when you get into the habit of just describing what you've done there, like I'll say skirt length, like so. And the one important bit to get into the habit of is this one here, reverse deformations. Say yes. So this means it'll assume you have a morphed character or a posed character. So if it's the Genesis default figure with no morphs in the A pose, you can leave it off. But if you have something like a custom character, or you have the character that's not in the A pose, and this needs to be switched on so that Daz Studio can recalculate or basically understand, hey, there's a morph on top of a morph, or there's a motion on top of a morph applied. And you hit accept, and that is that. Now with the dress selected on the parameters tab, we have our skirt length morph, and that can be dialed in now. That bulge is ugly, but for a demo it's fine. There. Set that to 0, and so that's the basic principle of making adjustments. So once you save this with your scene, this is going to come back. If you wanted to distribute that, that's kind of a topic for another session, I take it, but that's how we can do that. That's one morph. Let's make another morph. Let's make the skirt flare out at the bottom, as she maybe I'll actually give her a pose. How's that? Let's give her a pose, and then we'll go and make the skirt flare out at the bottom. See if I have one. I think we do have a bundle on offer right now, which is actually really cool, which is the... Brian, what was the bundle again that was on offer? It was one of the staff picks bundle. Genesis 8 Females 2, I believe. Very, very cool. Indeed, Yoshi, that's right. So it becomes a completely different asset, but it also becomes your asset. So if you had something from a different figure generation that doesn't quite work on the thing that you're working with, you had something from a different figure altogether, or you had a custom item that was made that wasn't quite rigged correctly, or you kind of half rigged it with the transfer tool, and it's poking through in all kinds of places, you can just make it, you can make that adjustment on a per scene basis. Like, think of adjusting hair that doesn't have quite the right morphs in it, or think of adjusting a necklace that never quite lines up with the chest, where there's always a little bit of like this inch of black where the necklace kind of hovers. You can make all these types of adjustments if you have a proper modeler. And ZBrush is good for that as well, and so is Blender, so I'll show you how to use that as well. Let's do a little bit of, whoops, sorry about that. Let's do a bit of flaring out. Oh yeah, the pose. Keep up, everyone, pose. When I say everyone, I meant me. I think this here, Fresh Beauty poses, I think that is part of today's bundle. You get about 70% off, I think. Staff picks for Genesis 8 Females bundle. That's the one, exactly. Kelly, how's it going? And Mr. Nico, good to see you again. Do you know, Spooky? Absolutely. And I'll talk more about how you can smooth things out for the curvy girls, because the chest morphs, they often really ruin good geometry, and we can kind of, bring that back. Let's go and let's have something like this, maybe, just so that I can show you this works with the pose as well. So this item also has deforce on it. So in this case, once we apply a pose like this, we're probably okay running deforce before we make the adjustment. So let's do that. So like here, the skirt on the bottom, I think we can probably improve that with deforce right off the bat. And then we'll make an adjustment that is going to make this look even better. Let's do this. We talked about deforce on previous occasions, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm just going to use the defaults, just so that the A pose is going to go into this pose and that the flare at the bottom looks a little bit nicer. Wilm, yes, there is. Is there a way to prevent stretching in the textures? Yes, to a certain extent there is. So if you had imagine you had short sleeves like these, and you want to turn them into really long sleeves all the way to the bottom, then there's really no way to prevent that unless you attach sleeves to this, but that is something we can't do. It's an actually really good point that that leads me onto the limitations of adjustments like that. So this is great for poke through, for making relatively small adjustments to something. But if it's about larger adjustments, then you'll run into the limit. So while I could stretch the geometry out, there's basically nearly no polygons left, and that'll lead to stretching. So you'd have to go and either, yeah, no, there's really no way to prevent that. There is, in a sense, that I've shown you with the stretching, with the scaling on the skirt that I did there. There's also a way to bring geometry back that happens due to kind of, you know, weight remaps. So like what I've shown you in the beginning with the auto-fitted skirt, with the auto-fitted shirt, there is a way to bring essentially geometry from down here further up so that the polygons are more square. But there's a limit. So there's another limit. You can't rip things apart. I can't open the dress like in the middle because the geometry is closed there. If you were to do that, it would change the geometry. That would then mean we can't import it as a morph target anymore. These morph targets all rely on the fact that they are based on exactly the same geometry that we're changing. So we're not adding or removing points to the geometry. We're leaving everything intact, and then we're going and just moving the position of the vertices. That's a morph target. So here, if you want to send another pose or another character over to Daz Studio, clear this scene out first. So I'll just shift select all the items in my scene down here and hit delete, and then that gets rid of that. And this now means Hexagon has a fresh scene into which to receive new items. So once again, I can go and select my figure up here, head over to File, Send to Hexagon. And there she is in her posed version now, with all morphs applied. So let's go and flare that skirt out, because currently it's just hanging down. Maybe we want to indicate motion, or maybe she's twirling it a little bit or something like that. So in order to do that, once again, select the dress. And for flare, I'm thinking, let's do the same that we did before, the edge selection. Pick one edge down here. Press L to select that whole loop cut. Increase the radius to kind of about here maybe. And then let's go use our rotation tool. So I can't see rotation very well here, even though it is there. It's very difficult for me to see it. So I'm going to go and switch over to my rotation manipulator here. And then I'll just go and take the blue ring here and twist that around like so. Or maybe the other way, maybe the other direction. Okay, maybe this way. If I wanted to have that a bit wider on the bottom, I can go and scale it, use the scale manipulator. And I suppose in both ways here, just with the yellow square, that'll stretch everything out. Like so. We'll take care of this poke through here with face selection. And make that a bit smaller. It's good to do that in multiple passes, so smaller adjustments more often, like this. And patience and subtlety are certainly keys here. Whoops. Patience and subtlety. Broad strokes first, followed by finer ones. And most of this is really down to practice. Okay, that's most of the poke through almost taken care of. You can also use these little white triangles here to not just pull in one axis. These are basically the two axes combined, so you can do that. Like so. All right, that's a little movement on the bottom. Now let's make it flare out. So this is where more rotation comes in handy. So like maybe here, we'll stay in face selection. Just pick this, and to make it easier, rotational gadget is being brought up. let's go and turn this up like so. Up and out. Like that. Same thing here maybe. Out. And then you can just about see the green thing here. So if with a little bit of practice, you know where they are and you don't have to change this quite so often. But if you don't see this, then go ahead and just bring up the, you know, rotation only thing. You can also pick multiple faces. So with Shift, you can select multiple faces if you wanted to try that. Whoops, mine just unselected. Just about see that. And if you don't, you know, rotation is probably easier. If you're ever wondering, well, I understand what the red, green, and blue circles are. What's the yellow one? What does that do? And that's one that always orients towards the screen. So no matter where you look, it always remains a round circle. I wish there was a way to make this show up a little bit better in the presentation. There we go, just curl this up a little. Patience and subtlety. If you've ever done this for a longer period of time, next time you look at the amount of included adjustment morphs in your favorite clothing item, you're probably going to say, man, this would have taken the creator forever. And that is true. It does take forever. To auto-fit, Yoshi, good point. Auto-fit won't correct those collisions. So auto-fit is clever in that it looks at weight maps and looks at which part of the influential zone from the previous figure was I supposed to adjust this on. And it often gets it wrong. It gets many things right, but sometimes it gets it wrong. So yeah, don't fault it for that. There's always a little bit of correction that might be necessary. We try and do this here, and you get the picture. So the more time you spend on this, the better it's going to look. Oop, that is, I screwed that up, didn't I? Bottom edge, yeah, that should work. That should work. Bottom edge, green, indeed, and move as well. Like that, and put the influence zone as high as you want. So maybe this was not good here. Let's go get rid of that. So you get the picture. Now we have it morphed in situ, and we can go and bring this back into Daz Studio here. So back into object selection mode here. Head over to File, Send to Daz Studio, which is eagerly awaiting the arrival of the new morph, and I'll call that skirt twirl, like so. And very important, so this is something that I didn't really notice, that I didn't know this when I started working with Hexagon. Reverse deformation, super important that is set to yes. If I leave that to no, then, which is the default, then it'll just ruin the dress. But by putting it to yes, I can go and dial in that morph. No problem. Skirt twirl and there we go. Neat. So the thing is really practice and have just a lot of fun with this. There's just so much you can do that just makes this a lot of fun. I'll go and show you one other thing in a different type of dress. I might actually save it. Let's go save this. Let's save it just in case we need to bring it back. With the brand new folder on the desktop. I'll call that adjust stream. There we go. And we'll give it another folder here just in case we need that twirl dress. Perfect. I don't think there is, Yoshi. Jeff, I'm so sorry. Did I give you half a heart attack there? Okay, saved it, it's all good. I don't think there is a sound that you can go so that, I don't know. There may be a Windows thing, but it's not something that I'm aware of. Let me show you the concept of morph mirroring, and I'll go and maybe just load a brand new figure, a brand new item of clothing here. Yeah, so mirroring, sometimes you have an absolutely symmetric garment, and not all garments are symmetric, mind. So that's something, if something isn't 100% symmetric, it'll be difficult for any 3D application to work this out. But if something is symmetric, which I think I may have something. Was it actually this dress? It was actually this dress. Let me stick with that dress. Yeah, let me stick with that dress. I think this is relatively symmetric. I think. If I tried this out, I can't remember. Say if I wanted to adjust the arm, to make the arm go down, and I adjust it on one side, I can tell Daz Studio when the morph gets imported to duplicate that onto both sides. I think. Let's try it out. This may, you know, not quite go so well, but let's try it out. So first of all, in Hexagon, once again, select everything in your viewport and then delete things out so that Hexagon has a fresh scene. And let's go very quickly, send to Hexagon. And once again, wherever the mouse is positioned, that is where we're zooming into. So if you have something like this, you think, man, Hexagon, what the hell? You can just go and zoom out, position your mouse where you want to actually see this thing, and then zoom in, and that's where things are happening. Alt right click to pan, Alt left click to rotate. So you go and select the dress, and once again in my edge selection mode, I'm going to go and select this, and I can see that this soft selection is probably a little bit too much here. So let's go turn that down so that I don't get the side of this. I'll show you a way in Blender for this to only select one arm here. Thought I had a much better shirt that I can demonstrate this on, but I think I've forgotten. So this is going to really stretch the polygons now, but just so that you see the principle. If I go and turn this, move this down like so, this would be ugly stretching. You can't really avoid that, even with a different shader. I'm making this change only on one arm. The Hexagon itself has a symmetry mode, but if you make adjustments like that, it'll look at the kind of combined origin point and it won't move the polygons where you think they should go. So I recommend you don't use that for these adjustments. So let's say this is her right arm. Even though it's on my left, it's technically her right arm. So let's make a mental note of that. And we go, and we've only changed one thing. Let's go under File, Send to Daz Studio. Morph Loader dialog comes up again. And we're going to go and rename the morph here into something like arm length. Like so. And we need to go and say reverse deformations again. And then there's this thing here, morph mirroring. So if we do nothing, the morph gets imported just as we've made it in Hexagon. So only her right arm, the arm on my left side, so her right arm is going to be morphed here. But if I go and right click on this here, so not on here, select this whole line, and then don't right click here on this second value column, then a context menu pops up, and that gives us the option to right to left mirroring. So if I select that, then there's mirroring options applied. So X is kind of is from left to right to left. That's essentially the red axis in Daz Studio, and that's the one that we need to use. There's also Y and Z, of course, but in our case, usually with figure symmetry is usually X. Let's choose that and see if it works. Does it? Created morph successfully. Does it actually work then though? Yes, look at that. So the morph that we've applied to one sleeve is now applied to both sides. So you can mirror these things as well. That's kind of neat. So yes, Hexagon, I highly recommend it for these types of small little changes. And with practice, there's really no limit to what you can change with Hexagon. It's kind of cool. Okay, so let's have a look at, let's go and close this. Or just remove these figures here. Let's have a look how we can use ZBrush in much the same way as Daz Studio, and why I recommend you have something like Hexagon as well as ZBrush side by side. So some things are better done with sculpting tools than they are done with vertex tools. So if I go back to my George example, in fact, let me just go and load the George scene in here, like George rock on. That would be very difficult to do with vertex selection tools. I mean, technically they're all vertex selection tools, but sculpting tools have so much more power, but they lack the control that you have over something like a simple, you know, ring loop, or just grab a couple of faces and all that. It might be a little bit tricky to do that. Yeah, there we go. That's George doing this air guitar thing. And I might go and turn his textures off just so that we see the effects a little bit better of what's happened here. So that's on his shirt. That is the pull-up morph. And this is this whole thing that would be very difficult to smooth out. So if you have breast morphs and anything that isn't shaped like the regular Genesis figure, often has these shrink wrap things here, and that doesn't look good. So we can do something like this and just smooth that out. And I'll show you a couple of things what has happened here on his clothing. If I go and bring the wires back here, you can see that sometimes you can see how the squares distort here, how the geometry distorts, and it's kind of our job to make that as uniform as possible so that, you know, the clothing looks good. And it's the same that we have with the shrink wrap breast morphs and all that. It's the same principle that we can use here. And while we're in this mode of doing things with George, I might show you how to do this as well. There's basically just a couple of morph brushes that we can use for that. And once I've shown you how this works, I'll go and show you how to do this in Blender as well, because ZBrush is expensive. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's also great. I've got to say, it's very good. It took me many years to get friendly with it, but it works in regards to integration really well together with Daz Studio. So I'll go and leave this as it is. So there are no morphs dialed in. We have this distortion here, and I'll show you how to smooth that out. So once again, much like with bringing things over to get in my belly. Right, I think so too, Jeff. Yes, the texture was a little bit distracting there. Tell you what, you have to select the top level figure of whatever you're changing. If you just select the shirt or just the pants, then only that ends up in ZBrush or in Hexagon. So select the top figure there, head over to File, Send to, and then we'll use ZBrush. And the cool thing is ZBrush, or in that case Hexagon, will start. Export with deformations. There's two things here, at current resolution and export with deformations. I want these with deformations, so that means not the A-pose. If I'd untick this, George would arrive in the A-pose. And actually without the George morph, it'll be basically Genesis male in the A-pose that arrives in ZBrush, which is unrelated to what we have in the scene. So use that. Export at current resolution will export it subdivided. So that's usually not what you want. Hit accept. ZBrush will start. Well, once we've done that, I will show you a quick way of where you can set some of these options in case some of these dialogues don't pop up on your installation of either Hexagon or ZBrush. I'll show you where to set that up. I think I need that shredder freebie, Yoshi. Good idea. So ZBrush, I'll just go through this very briefly because it's a whole minefield. It's not necessarily an intuitive app, but once you've worked with it a few times, it really does grow on you. So in order to get this done here, comma, left click and drag while holding down Shift, press T followed by F. That's what you have to do in order to, you know, make this happen. And there's George, which is nice. Navigation is a little tricky here, but you know, it is possible to pan and rotate and zoom, so it is all possible. What I like doing is, obviously, if you have multiple items in your scene, you can open the subtool palette here, and that shows you all the items that we have. So there's George, and there's the shirt, and there's the pants, and there's even individual buttons that come in as separate objects. So what I love about both Hexagon and the ZBrush Bridge is that they take care of this whole stuff, that they take care of the correct item is exported and re-imported, and it's happening at the correct resolution, at the correct scale and all that. When we're going to look at how to do this in Blender, we have to do all these things manually, and that often leads to issues. So yeah, we can either select one of these items in the subtool tab that we want to sculpt on, or just Alt select the thing you want to sculpt on, and then that changes color. To make that even more visible, I'm going to go into this mode here, transparency, and that grays out all the things that we don't want to deal with right now. So just the shirt. You can overlay the wireframe if you find that helpful. I sometimes switch it on just to make just to check things out. And so it's one thing that we see right off the bat, and that George appears to have some poke through here, but we didn't see that in Daz Studio. That's another very important thing I wanted to talk to you about, that in here in Daz Studio, most of the clothing items have a smoothing modifier applied, and that is there to kind of get rid of some poke through and smooth things out as good as it's possible. But it's also interesting to switch that off and just see how much work the smoothing modifier is actually doing. So with that, on the parameters tab under general, there's usually this section which is mesh smoothing here, and this is usually enabled here. If it isn't, you can add it yourself. Some clothing doesn't come with it, and you can add it yourself. You can play with the smoothing iterations and the collision iterations here to make Daz Studio work harder or less hard. And while it looks okay here, it doesn't look okay in ZBrush. So when we switch off the smoothing modifier, I can see all kinds of issue on George here. And this is something that is being gotten rid of by the smoothing modifier. But be aware how much work it sometimes is doing. So it's worth switching this off and saying, hey, really, even though this is usable, if I switch it off, I can see that this item of clothing has serious issues, and I should really fix them in my modeling application, like either Hexagon or ZBrush or Blender, so that this poke through doesn't happen off the bat. And then if you have tiny pieces, you can just go and switch it off, switch it on then, and just let Daz Studio do a little bit of work, but don't make it work so hard, you know. So very important, often good idea to just check, hey, what does it look like without the smoothing? And then gives you a better idea of, you know, and then you can go and expand all. Exactly, yes, then you can go and expand all. So in ZBrush, we see something very similar here, that there's, you know, so if I wanted to get rid of that, the standard brush usually works a treat. You just with small strokes, you can go over here and just expand that like so. There's a little bit of stuff here. That's how you can get rid of that. So the default brush that is enabled in ZBrush is called the standard brush. Brush menu's up here, so B brings that up, and those are all the things you can select. And that greatly confused me in the beginning, because I was thinking, I don't even know where to begin here. The good thing is you only need 3 or 4 brushes to work effectively with ZBrush. There's the first one, and it goes by shortcut. So BST is a standard brush. So if you type that BST, it'll go and whittle down this menu. B for the whole brush menu. S will get rid of most of these. And somewhere you have the standard brush here, and it shows you these shortcut keys. So BST is the standard brush. And that is good in order to raise things out along the surface normal. So wherever the, whoops, sorry, George. So wherever this circle is positioning itself, those are the surface normals. And when you park it here and then left click and drag, you can see that if I had a little bit more intensity here, as you left click and drag, you can see that that's where this thing is going. Control Z undoes that. And that's of course way too much. So, you know, just for illustration purposes, so intensity, maybe like 20 is probably a good idea, even lower than that. In short strokes, you can go and bring things out. You can also make the brush larger. So that's with the square keys, so much like in Blender and in Photoshop, you can make your brush larger. And you can also use it with a tablet. So it's, you know, it's sweet what you can do here. So that's one brush to get things out of geometry along the surface normal. That's the standard brush. So also this is kind of the history. We'll go back to kind of this. Yeah, perfect. So then the other brush that we need from time to time is the smoothing brush, and that is in here as well, but you can also have access to it with the shift key. So shift always smooths. By the time you hold that down, notice that this icon here changes from standard to smooth. So this is essentially all the magic behind it. Pull things out, smooth things out with shift, or, you know, do it the other way around. Smooth things, then pull things out again. And this is happening by default with too much intensity. So you probably want to go and take the intensity down here. So the smooth brush is on 100%. That's too much. So let's go and put that maybe 20 to 30, something like that. So now shift will smooth this out. Not shift, standard brush brings this out again. Short brush stroke. Shift, smooth this out. Anything that is unkosher, just smooth it. It'll kind of melt into George. And then with short brush strokes, grab that out again, like so. Gets rid of all these little scrunches and imperfections here. So then to the item at hand, namely the under boob smoothing here, is essentially that a couple of times. So you go and smooth things out, bring things up again. Smooth things out with the shift key, bring things out. Oops. And thanks to this ghost mode here, you can go and see how far am I away from the real geometry. So maybe I need a bit more smoothing here. Maybe my brush is a little too large. There we go. There. That's that other side. I can also do it the other way around. I can pull it out first, like so, and then smooth. That was a little bit too much here. Either flatten it out with smoothing it in, or you can also go and sculpt the other direction. That is also possible. So you can go and just with the standard brush here as an example, if I go and I wanted to put this bulge inwards, I can by default left click and drag sculpts outwards. But if you hold down Alt and then left click and drag, you sculpt inwards. So you're using the same brush, but it goes the other way. So that can also be helpful. So if I've sculpted something out too much, I can go and just, you know, push this in, smooth it out, do something like that. So that should be that already. I could go ahead and smooth out the belly distortions just with the shift key, just very small strokes. See that? This is just so much better now. Same on the back here. These things, they can probably also be smoothed a little bit. Professional smoothing. Some mini bits here, the smoothing modifier in Daz Studio will take care of it. But, you know, I would suggest fix as much as you can. And that's basically that job done, which is really neat. So now we go, in order to bring us back into Daz Studio, we have a special button here at the top right that's called GoZ, and that's kind of GoZ's API that makes other apps interact with it so that we don't have to worry about temporary files and all that. Just all you have to do is click it, and the first time you do it, it'll go through this process of saying, hey, where are all the apps? I've discovered Photoshop, and I've discovered, you know, all kinds of other things, and you just have to tell it or verify the path, and then we're there. Same as with Hexagon, dialog comes up that lets us create a morph. You can give it the path name, which is essentially, you know, the path there, and give it the morph name. So I'll say shirt smooth, for example. I'll call it shirt smooth ZB, just so that that it doesn't interfere with any of the other morphs that I may have called the same already. Hit accept, and that's ZBrush, or that's the plugin having taken care of it. So once again, with the shirt, under parameters, under morphs, under ZBrush, shirt smooth ZB, left click and drag, and smooth it all out. And this is now without the smoothing modifier. So let's go and switch that back on. Under mesh smoothing, pop that on, and then a little bit of poke through has gone away. And that looks much, much nicer and neater than, whoops, than the previous one that was there without. So by default, you're allowed to go to -100 and +100, but you might also want to mess with that. If you think, well, I don't want this to go into the negative, you set that to 0, and you're thinking maybe maximum of 100, maybe that was too much, maybe 80 is a good maximum to have, then you can also set that. So, you know, totally up to you. 75 is actually enough of the smoothing. So I could go and say, just dial that in less, or just make, you know, 75 or 64, whatever the top value. Also possible. Mesh grabber, yes, that is possible as well. Mesh grabber, I think I've mentioned that in another session. I think in the donut session we talked about mesh grabber briefly. Many people prefer it, and it's fully integrated into Daz Studio. I think I might go and give a whole different session, dedicate a whole different session to mesh grabber, because it is valuable, but it also costs money. And I'm always, if you're anything like me, I'm always liking things that are free. And mesh grabber is a good product, but it does cost you like 60 bucks to do the same functionality that you can do in Hexagon. And Hexagon is more flexible, and it's available free. So that's kind of my advocacy for that. It's an outdated app, but for making small changes, it's beautiful. So I'm not going to bring this back, just to finish this off here. How would we go and lift up his shirt? That is something we can also do here with George. So there's other brushes that do other things. So the standard and the smoothing brush, and we'll find their equivalents in Blender as well. The standard and the smoothing brush, they're really good starting points, but there's so many others, and two of them I wanted to quickly introduce you to. One of them is the move brush. That is, Blender calls it, I think, the grab brush. ZBrush calls it the move brush. BM, there's actually 3 here. There's move elastic, move topological, and just the move brush. And they all work really well. Let me just show you the regular move brush. The BMV is the shortcut for that. It'll go into the direction of, well, it'll grab the geometry where the circle is. And then if I go and left click and drag, it'll move the polygons into that direction, like so. That's where that moves it to. So with subtlety, this can work well depending on the size of the brush. So left click and drag, you can literally go and move his shirt up like so, and you can see what happens to the geometry. It just is being moved where my brush is moving. So it also gets it wrong sometimes. Like you can see, it's been basically, I've looked at this and everything's being moved up, but it's not being moved up along his body. So that I either have to go and get rid of that now, or I have to use a different brush. So move is a very what's the word? It does one thing. There's the other one, BM move elastic, that works a little bit differently, in that it grabs larger parts of the geometry. and moves it kind of along there, like parallel to the surface normals, like that. And usually it's not, you don't use one brush, you use a combination of multiple brushes. So you do this, and then I'm noticing here that some of his shirt's now going into his body, so I'm going to need to go and grab that back by BST, going back to my regular brush and digging that out of his body, like so. And then maybe I've overdone it a little bit. I need to go and smooth this out a little again. Shift, I'll do that. Or maybe even just with the Alt key, get that, press this bulge here back into his body. So, you know, if you play with it, it's a really fun tool to do this with. So BM to move it, and then move elastic. There's also move topological. This is another way of moving things. This is elastic. BMT for topological. That moves much larger portions of the clothing. So that's another way that you can use to, you know, move straps out of the way or loosen things up. It also goes and distorts a little bit. You can see some crinkles creeping in here. It's kind of cool. Smooth this out. BST. I'll go and sculpt that in again. Go grab that out, like so. But then the final brush I wanted to show you is how do we make like cloth crinkles that, like, now his shirt is up believably, but it also doesn't look believable because it doesn't really there's no wrinkles in there. If I pull my shirt up, then it kind of, you know, wrinkles everywhere. So there's another brush that makes that happen in ZBrush, and that is the cloth brush. So BC, there's going to be cloth here somewhere. There's cloth move, there's cloth nudge, there's cloth finch. So there's all kinds of things. So cloth move, I think, is something that'll introduce these wrinkles here. It has to be fairly large. That's actually not the brush I was looking for. Sorry. BC, which one was it? This cloth hook. So that makes, these are all, there's like several cloth brushes. These make little wrinkles here. And if done right and with the correct intensity, you can do really believable effects here, and combining all these kinds of brushes. So very cool. And we need more wrinkles in his back here. BST, Alt key. Grab that out. Cloth nudge, also cool. Nudge is probably my favorite because that goes and just grabs the cloth and just adds wrinkles here. It's very cool. Once again, smooth if you've done it too much. Or turn down the intensity. Intensity is 100%. That's a bit much. Maybe drag that down. BST. Grab this out again. Go back to BCU for cloth nudge. Add wrinkles. It's very cool. That's what sculpting tools can bring to the party. And, you know, obviously don't ruin it like I did, but you can see the potential. That's just the standard brush grabbing things out of his body. There we go. So that's how ZBrush basically works. It is $900, I'm afraid, for the full version. There's a smaller version available called ZBrush Core, I believe, and that is, you can get that for less, but it currently is no longer a perpetual license. I believe they've started having annual licenses, or like you say, Spooky, it's a monthly subscription. How much is Core? Is that, what is that? $39 a month, that's probably the full version, or is that Core? One of those things. No, I think, was it Core that was free? I think they do 3 versions. One that used to be Sculptress, that is now called something. And then there is the full version, and then there's one in the middle that is kind of slightly cheaper. And the only difference is that it doesn't have some of the very powerful kind of unwrapping tools. So it is perfectly usable with Daz Studio. ZBrush Mini, is that it? That could be. Yeah, Sculptors, I think they just got rid of that name because it's technically not a ZBrush product. They bought that in. So, but speaking of which, some of these things can be done in Blender, and Blender is completely free. The only downside is that this elegant integration between Daz Studio and Blender is currently not there. So the bridges that we have between Hexagon and ZBrush, they are just so tightly integrated, and it's just so fantastic, and it's a big time saver to bring changes back and forth between the two applications. Blender, the current Blender bridge, as well as Teleblender and Diffeomorphic, which are two different bridges. So there's those two, and then there's the Daz to Blender bridge. Those only work one way, so they let you go and bring in like Daz assets into Blender for rendering there, but they don't let you bring in an asset, make a change, and then bring the morph back quite as nice as these two apps can do that. I'm hoping that maybe in the future that will happen. I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe we'll go and let's go and stick with George here. I'll go and bring his unsmoothed shirt back to the to this particular position here, and I'll go and show you how I would do this in Blender, because so Blender has both vertex tools as well as sculpting tools, which makes it a really powerful app. But the settings that you need to know to export assets and then subsequently import them again, they're a little bit tricky. So bear with me here as I show you all this. In fact, maybe we'll come back to George later. Let's go and George rock on. I'll save him, and I'll go and start with a regular Genesis figure, maybe the skirt dress again, so that we can look at something really simple before we go on to George. We have enough time. And we also have time for questions, which is great. I'm going to have a look at those in a second. So we have our figure here. George will be coming back later, I'm sure. George comes back. And do you know what? Let's actually, yes, let's do that. Let's go do that dress again, because it's a really nice example. Maybe we'll find something else. Maybe we'll find a skirt here. Let's go and find this skirt here. Casual Fashion Volume 2. Let's use this skirt. It's transparent. What's going on? I'll go and put a different color on it. That's a leather material here. That's nice. Maybe green. Do we see it in the preview? Oh, maybe we don't. It's okay. We'll see it in Blender. And I'm not going to put it in a pose, because you'll know by now it works both ways. Let's go and adjust this skirt. So in order to do this in Blender, we need to export the skirt and the figure separately. And we can export the figure in the regular resolution, but we need to export the skirt in its base resolution. Otherwise, there's going to be a geometry mismatch when we bring the thing back. So on the figure itself, I'll show you quickly where that is. With the figure selected, mesh resolution, we can leave this on high resolution for the Genesis figure. But for the skirt here, that's the skirt, we need to go and leave that on base resolution. So switch that over from high res to base res. Not every item of clothing has that, a subdivision surface modifier applied, but those that do, they need to be switched to base. Very important. The figure doesn't, but the clothing does. So let's go and hide the skirt. I find it the easiest way, just to make sure everything about that skirt is hidden, is to go and control click the eyeball icon, just in case there's other things that are parented to the skirt. And the skirt might not be just one figure, so control click to make sure everything is selected and everything is, being gotten out of the way. Then we have our figure, and the figure needs to be exported with the following settings. So very important: File, Export. Then we change the Save As type down here to Wavefront OBJ, and we'll go and save it somewhere safe. So Adjust Stream. This one, I'm going to call this one Blender Skirt. And in here, I'm just going to go and call that Genesis 8 Female. That's it. You can call it a pose if you wanted to reuse it, but that's basically it. Do that. Then this menu comes up, and this I suggest you use Daz Studio, and you can literally leave everything else as it is, or do what I do, save yourself a little bit of hard drive space and don't export the maps, or in fact don't export any surfaces. So just untick this, and you can leave all of the rest is just in place, except, yeah, no, that's all it. Ignore invisible nodes, that's all ticked by default. So Daz Studio preset here, and just untick right surfaces because we don't need them in Blender. And that's really all you need to do. Technically, there's something else you need to do, but I don't want to overload you. Do that, we're good. That's for the figure. Now, control eyeball icon this figure to hide everything about her, and control eyeball icon that skirt to bring the skirt back. It's already in low resolution. Let's bring that back. File, export, same thing, wavefront OBJ, and we're going to call this one skirt. Save. And we can leave everything else exactly as it is because Daz Studio is going to remember that. So Daz preset, still remembered, no surfaces. Boom. And that's that. So then of course we close Hexagon down and open up the Blender. I've just installed Blender 3.2 latest version, and I'm glad I did because they've changed the OBJ exporter and we're going to need that. So one of those things. I'm showing you this multiple times with Blender, by the way, because it is a little tricky to get used to it. So we don't really need anything in our scene. So I'll click A or tap A again to select everything, and then I select X to remove everything from my scene, including camera, lights, and so forth. Let's go and bring in our Genesis figure with File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. In the previous version it was up here, now it's down here. It's cool, I'm okay with it. Now we go and find our Genesis figure. So adjust stream, Blender skirt. There she is, G8F OBJ. And there's one thing I would make that's under geometry. By default, it says split by object. And I don't really want that. I want one cohesive figure, not several pieces. So I want to untick that. And the rest we can leave as it is. Import OBJ. And that'll now bring in slightly oversized Genesis figure. And we'll work on that when we do this again. So the astute observer knows Genesis is in here. Can do the same thing, File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. Now go get the skirt. It'll remember the settings here, so it's now no longer splitting things. And there's the skirt, perfect. Now the astute observer, if I go and select Genesis and press N, I can open my properties panel here. I can see that the dimensions of Genesis are very large. So the Y up axis for the figure is 179 meters. So he's like a giant in here. So the scale between Blender and Daz Studio doesn't match. You don't really have to worry about it. You do and you don't have to worry about it. If you just make a change with vertex tools, you're good. But if it comes to exchanging other data with Blender, you might find that, so Blender is particular about real life size. So if you experiment with physics and you have a 180 meter figure and you wanted to, whatever, chuck bricks on her, then those bricks would be unbelievably huge and unbelievably heavy, and that's a problem for Blender. So I recommend you adhere to the Blender scale. So you export in a lower scale, like in a smaller scale, and you export as a larger scale so that both Daz Studio and Blender are happy internally. We'll worry about that in a second though. So before we do this again, let me just go and quickly talk you through how we do these things in Blender. So with your item of clothing selected, you can head into edit mode, and this is where your vertex tools are. So navigating in Blender, let me know if you need help with that. I'm happy to help you. These are the selections. So this is the vertex selection, this is edge selection, and this is face selection. A will select or deselect everything. So like before, we can go and use the edge selection tool to make the skirt larger if we wanted, by selecting one edge down here. To make a a completely round loop here, you alt select an edge, and then Blender will try its best to select the whole edge, which it has done here. So now you can go and make all kinds of changes here. Like for example, you can either use the shortcut keys, like S Shift Z would bring that out. It doesn't look good because soft selection isn't active. Or you can go and say G to move that, or GZ to move that. Or you can use these things here. If you select that, you see your gizmo. If you don't know what these things are, you can left click and drag, open this panel up so that there's like little descriptions here that might help. There's also rotate and there's scale. And this is just box selection here. So in box selection, all these keyboard shortcuts are available. So I kind of use a combination of both. The principle we've learned in Hexagon about one tick box soft selection, Blender has that as well, and it calls it proportional editing, and that's up here. So we can enable that. This is enabled, this is disabled up here. But on the right hand side, there's a whole host of other things that we can use. The type of curve that is applied here. And we'll worry about that. We won't actually worry about that. So now if I go and use my move tool, and the moment I left click any of these axes, I see that a tiny circle comes up here. This is the one, like this one here, that's the circle. And that is the area of influence. So it's really tiny at the moment. So while I left click and drag, it's a little inconvenient to do that. You got to also scroll your mouse wheel to make that area of influence a little larger. And when you do that, you can see as you move it, this is now the rest of the skirt being influenced. As I make that smaller, area of influence goes down. As I make that larger, area of influence goes up. So I can probably get away with something like this here. And then I can go and scale that as well. You can use the scale tool here, or G Shift Z and oops, S Shift Z. Let's make that a little bigger. And also go and rotate that. So RZ will rotate the skirt like this, as much or as little as you like. And then we can go and do our vertex bits and pieces again with the face tool. Just like I've shown you in Hexagon, once you select something, you can go and drag pieces out with the proportional editing here. And let's say this is our change. We can go and export this again. So we'll do this like 2 or 3 more times. So just so you know that you get into the habit of it. And I'll show you the scale thing as well there. So you go back out of edit mode either with the tab key or with just switch it up here to object mode. This is also where you find sculpt mode. That's nice. So go back here, click on the item you want to export and head over to File, Export, Wavefront OBJ. In here we're going to go and find our adjusted Blender skirt. So this is now skirt hack morph, I'll call it. And I don't have to change anything in here except for on the geometry menu. Super important, this tick box here, keep vertex order. I don't have to worry about scale because I haven't worried about going in. I'm not going to worry about going out. But in the next step, I'm going to show you how you should worry about it and what exactly you need to do. This is it, export. And then the only other thing of importance is this one here at the top. Limit to selection only. So this means only our skirt is going to be exported and not the Genesis figure. And that's very important. So selection only and keep the vertex order. Super important. You don't do that, you're screwed. That's the skirt exported. And I can go and bring that morph into Daz Studio now, the manual way. So technically what's been happening under the hood with Hexagon and ZBrush was that the morph loader was kind of triggered internally, but we can make that happen manually by selecting our item of clothing, namely our skirt, heading over to Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro. There's advanced as well, but it doesn't matter. Pro is, we're pros, that's good. So click that, and then this dialog comes open auto magically, and you can pick the file that we've just exported from Blender. So there's load morphs for, keep that on vertex only. Then there's choose the morph file. You can grab multiple if you wanted to do that. And just Blender skirt, I'm going to call it, this one is the skirt hack morph. Open. And you have all the other options that we had before. So just to be on the safe side, reverse deformations, definitely set that to yes. If you can't find this drop down menu, you might be on this side. So if you're on the left column and you right click, nothing happens. But if you're on the right side and you click, then the options come up. So just one of those things. That's it. Skirt hack morph is the name. That's cool. We're going to go and hit accept. And what we want to see is this success message here, created morph successfully. If that doesn't happen, then it means your geometry either on export from Daz Studio or on export from Blender wasn't correct, and it's not identical to this skirt object. So it's caused many a headache. So in here under morphs, I've got the skirt hack morph, and that works just like it did in Blender. So let's take care of the scale and do this one more time a little bit more properly, because it is important that we don't have a 180 meter tall figure inside Blender, just in case you ever do something where sculpting brushes behave weird and, you know, physics behave weird. You want to have a kind of 1.70 meter figure in a 1.70 meter Blender scene. You don't want to have that, you know, 100 times larger, which that is actually the scale. 100 times, the difference is 100. So I'll go and make my skirt invisible again, bring my Genesis figure back, and export her at the correct scale, which is divide by 100 as you export from Daz Studio, and then multiply by 100 as you export from Blender, and then everyone's happy. It's just something you get used to eventually. So with the figure selected, nothing else visible, very important. No eyelashes, no geografts, no tear ducts and all that. That needs to all be invisible. Otherwise, it'll be a problem if you ever make a character morph. So not so much for clothing. For clothing, you just need to make sure the clothing is in base res, and there's nothing else with the clothing is exported. For characters, for a reference character, doesn't matter. But if you ever make a morph on a character, you're going to make sure all these things are switched off. Otherwise, you can't import the morph back. So export G8F. I'll just overwrite that. And it is essentially the same options that I've shown you before. So Daz Studio preset. The only difference is, so no maps. We don't want maps. Just, you know, we don't need to save them out. The only difference is scale, not 100%. Make it 1%. So divide by 100 as you export, and multiply by 100 as you export from Blender. So divide by 100 to make it 1. Export. To make that match the skirt, let's go bring that back. With the skirt selected, file, export, I'll just overwrite this in skirt. Everything is the same, so once you've set this, you don't have to worry about it anymore, unless you restart Daz Studio. And now in Blender, I might go and just create a brand new scene here for us. Don't save. Press A twice, then hit X to remove everything from your scene. Head over to File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. Adjust Blender Skirt G8F. Here, Geometry, don't want to split. Import OBJ. And here's my girl. And she's now the correct size. So if I go and open my panel here with N, click off her and on her again, I can see that the item is now 1.79 meters. So that is the correct Genesis scale. So 100 times smaller than, you know. The 72-inch laptop. I'm still looking forward to that. That would be so good. Let's go under File, Import. That would be so cool. Which pocket would that fit in though? Skirt OBJ. This is all still taken care of. Import, and it fits. So that's perfect. Notice that before you can edit something in Blender, you have to click off the object and on it again. So the dark orange versus yellow outline, there is a difference. I don't know which one, but you have to do it, otherwise it doesn't work. I'll give these two objects a different color as well, just because it's just for presentation purposes. It's nice and easy to do that. You can do that at the bottom here on this palette. I'm not going to set up a proper material for that, just viewport display colors. So maybe the skirt can be that. And then I'm going to go and select my Genesis figure and give her something like, I don't know, maybe like that. Just so that we can tell these two things apart. The gray on gray is not great. So with the skirt selected, you enter the vertex editing tools either here on the top menu with edit mode, or you press tab. That both of these things work. And then by default everything is selected, and then you can go and play around with it. So in my case here I'm going to use face selections, and I'll go and just make the skirt just, you know, turn up a little bit, just like we saw with Hexagon, before we go and move on to the sculpting tools and of course your questions. So once again you select this here, and if you want to use these tools here, let's go to move. Oh yeah, this is another important thing. Like we discussed before, no matter what I select right now, the manipulator is always going to appear the same way. If you wanted to have that showing the way the normals are facing, change it up here where it says global, change that to either local or normal, and then that'll change the appearance of your manipulator. And now it goes and changes wherever I point it, so quite nice. Do that. Let's go back into our proportional editing, which is the Blender's way of saying soft selections, and that is such a large circle it's not even on the screen anymore. So while you do that, while you left click on this, you have to go and scroll the mouse wheel. Might help if you zoom out. It's partly the problem of having the, there it is, it was so large, it was off the screen here. So now as I go left click, I can just about see the, whoops, I can just about see the circle there, and that might be too much. So make that less, like kind of maybe like this here. Do that, and then you can do I think, is it R? No, that's RZ maybe. No, that's the RY, something like that. Or you just use the rotate manipulator. Once you got that, rotate here, rotate up, rotate, and much like in Hexagon, the white circle here in Blender, that's the one that's always aligned up to the screen. So depending on where you're looking from, that'll be the white circle here. So I know the red circle is probably the one that's going to give me the best results here, but you could also go and use the orthographic viewport. So like one will look from the front, and now the white circle is going to do exactly left and right twisting, you know, like this. And then 3 is from the side, so now it's going to go and twist from the, oops, sorry, from the side here. If ever you needed. I thought I'd let you know. Maybe one more at the back here. Out, rotate. Oops. I thought I had the green circle. There we go. So that's nice for vertex things you want to adjust. And then go and export back. We're going to go do that, and then we'll have a look at the sculpting tools, which are very similar to ZBrush. So once again, once you've made your change, to get out of here, either at the top, edit mode, switch it back to object mode, or hit tab. Tab will switch between edit and object mode. Now we're going to export that file, export, wavefront OBJ. Desktop, adjust stream, Blender skirt. I'll call that Hackmorph 2 maybe? No, I'm going to call that skirt flare. So in here, this is now the important bit as it comes to exporting things out again. So first of all, selection only, very important. Select that so that only your selected object, namely the skirt, is being exported. And then at the bottom here under geometry, two things. First of all, super important, keep vertex order. If you don't tick that, you can't import the morph, or you can import it, but the geometry totally distorts and your thing is going to blow up. That's not good. Second thing, since we have adjusted the scale in Daz Studio on export, let's also adjust the scale on export from Blender. Once you've done it 200 times, it really grows on you. So scale 100, because in Daz Studio it's percent, in Blender it's float values. So in Blender 100 doesn't mean 100%. In Blender 100 means 100 times 1, which is then 100 times larger. And now we can go and hit export OBJ. Here it is. Every program uses different manipulator keys to get around the viewport, which is crazy stuff. So you need to select the skirt and then head over to Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro. Then go and pick your morph file. So I had skirt flare. Open. I don't have to worry about the scale. If ever you had exported something, you want to adjust that in Daz Studio on import, you can do that here, but we don't have to worry about it. We've taken care of it in Blender. We want to go and make sure reverse deformations is on. And trust me when I say repetition is the key to learning this. So you really have to do this, make a mistake, figure out why you've made a mistake, just keep doing it, and eventually you'll be flying around this in no time. And here's skirt flare. Haha, goody. And this is what minimal, we'll set that to 1. You can't even set the maximum value of to something larger than 100. So like, try 200. And then maybe this is gonna make it flare even more. So it's kind of nice. I haven't even modeled that, but it, might work for a nice scene. So don't be afraid to experiment and change your clothing items, fix poke through and all that. Why do some items need the morph loader to be chosen for figure rather than object things? Here it seems not to have done a difference in the treatment. I'm not sure if I understand your question, AMZ. Items morph loader to be chosen for figure rather than object. Oh, actually now I know what you mean. It doesn't make a difference at all. Daz Studio under the hood differentiates between an object and a figure. It reckons a figure is something that's rigged and an object is something that's unrigged. But if you head over to here, so edit object morph loader pro and edit figure morph loader pro, it calls exactly the same script. So most of these things are compatible with one another, but some are specific for figure and some are specific for an object. So even though my skirt is technically figure, I could have done this, but object will, as you've seen, does do exactly the same thing. So this is just a shortcut to launch the script essentially. Good question though. You're very welcome. It's some of these things like, object geometry convert to sub D, for example. That's another one that you find the same one in figure geometry convert to sub D. It does exactly the same thing. It's just, more stuff in the menu. Some people say, hey, look, I'm dealing with a figure, so they probably instinctively look for edit figure. Other people then deal with an object. It doesn't make much of a difference. Good question though, very good question. Let me load George back in and show you the sculpting tools on George, because that was a really good example. We don't need the skirt anymore. George, come back to us. And I'll show you how to use the sculpting tools, because that is really, really cool in Blender and it's completely free. They are called different things than in ZBrush. If you're okay with this method of importing and exporting things like I've shown you, and I'm showing you this one more time now, you will get used to it eventually. If you're okay with that, try out the tools in Blender, because it's free and it's one of those things. This makes it slightly difficult here. I'm going to go and remove all the clothing items, and I'm just going to export George as he is. Is he high res or is he base res? I can't quite tell. He's high res. That's cool. We can export him high res because he's just a reference figure. So once again, with third time lucky, file, export, and I'll call him George as wavefront OBJ. And I'll leave everything as it is. So that was just for repetition's sake. What I did here is use the Daz Studio option, not the Blender option, by the way. Very important. This one is kind of broken. I don't think it's worked in over 10 years. So we're using the Daz Studio one because that's the one that works. We're turning the scale down to 1%, and we're not exporting the surfaces here. That's all we're doing. You can. It's not a biggie if you do. It's just, it saves these things out to the hard drive, and you don't really need that. It's a bit of time that you're saving it. Disable that. 1%. Accept. That's George exported. Now we need to export the clothing. And I'm kind of glad I've chosen this particular object because that George's shirt is a little bit special. Let me go and make George invisible and show you the shirt. Control click eyeball icon. We see the shirt in the viewport. But if I open the shirt up, I can see that there's a shirt add-on underneath the regular shirt. Now this, I don't know what it is, but just as a word of warning, if I export this, make a change and try to import this back into Daz Studio is going to come back and say, hey, sorry, there's a geometry mismatch. Even though, why would there be? I'm just exporting the shirt. Well, it depends really on the item of clothing. This one has an additional item that I don't want to see. So it doesn't make a difference in the viewport. If I control eyeball icon that, I don't see a difference here. But there must be something, because I've tried this earlier, just in case you do ever have clothing that gives you a repeated geometry mismatch. See if there's anything that's attached to the item of clothing that's causing that. You can even count the vertices if you like, but yeah, this is in this case, I need to switch that off as well, because it's one of those things that'll bite you in the backside. With the shirt selected under parameters, I need to, under mesh resolution, I'm going to have a look if this is high res or base res. It only comes as base res, so I don't need to change it. But if your clothing has a subdivision surface modifier applied to it, switch it to base res before exporting it. Super important. And this is George shirt. Export, same export settings. We're all good here. 179 meters tall and wide. Operator, that's crazy. Cube man. I might just go double tap A and hit X to clear everything out and bring George in. See what we can do in the sculpting magic here. George. There we go. This is already unticked, which is nice. Split we don't need. Again, it's not a major issue if you leave it on. It just means that your object will be split up into multiple parts, which makes selection of the figure difficult. Here's George. File import his shirt. George shirt. Same thing, everything is as it should be. And here's his shirt. Just so that we can tell the two apart, I'll click off the shirt, click on it again, and then at the bottom right here, I'll go onto this material option. I have one material. I'm going to change the color under viewport display into something like blue, and then I'll select George and set him to something like, I don't know, maybe green. George looking ill today. There. All right. Now let's have a look at the sculpting tools. So very, very cool. It's similar mechanic as the vertex editing tool. So select the item that you want to sculpt on. In this case, our shirt. Head over here to object mode and switch that to sculpt mode. Brian really, really loves the sculpting tools. Brian's really fallen in love with it. I think you've bought yourself a tablet, right, Brian? Like a drawing tablet? Because that really makes a lot of sense if you do sculpting a lot. Insert Shrek reference here. I love it. Yeah, so sculpting, if you're an artist that likes doing things with a pen, give sculpting with a pen a go. And in Blender, it's free. If it grows on you, if you really like it, then you know, see if you want to have that trial version of ZBrush. So Blender starts all these these are all the brushes here on the left hand side. You can scroll down and they all have these nondescript icons here. If you want to see what they are, you can go and left click and drag this out here, and then you either have this one column, two column displays, or you can see what they're called, and that is really helpful. Seasoned veterans don't really do that. They might have something like this, and they know exactly which icon means what. I'm not an icon person. You can go and press Shift Space. That'll bring up this list of brushes, and also their shortcut keys here. And this is only while you hold it down. So Shift Space brings that up, and you can select brushes from here as well. That's the grab brush. Shift Space, that's the draw brush, and then it goes away. So Shift Space and then leave space, and then it goes away again. That's, that also happens. So Blender has the same thing as ZBrush does. So with any brush selected here, like this is the first one here, that is called the draw brush. Left clicking and dragging anywhere will drag things out in the size that your brush is going to be set to. So square brackets to make that larger or smaller. You can also change that here under radius, and here's where you can change the strength. So if 0.5 isn't strong enough, we can change that to something larger like 0.8. We'll make a much larger change there. Control Z undoes it. And in Blender, if you want to do the reverse of, like, this pulls out, if you want to do this in, you have to hold down Control. So Control that will sculpt in. We can just about see that indentation that I've made there. But much like in ZBrush, Shift also is a smooth brush. So if I go, maybe I'll make this like, 0.3, strength 0.3 on the regular draw brush. Left click and drag, sculpt that out, and then hold down Shift, and that'll go smooth this out. I think by default the smoothing is very strong. In order to change that, you have to actually select the smooth brush in here, and it's set to 0.7, so that's a little strong. Let's make that like 0.3 as well. Once you've done that in the smooth brush, you can go back to the draw brush, and then as soon as you hit Shift, you don't see any visual changes in Blender. Just know that when you hit Shift, it goes and smoothes it out as the value that you set in the smooth brush. There, with Shift, that smooths it out. And with the regular draw brush, small clicks, it'll do that. Sometimes if you prefer to see a wireframe here in Blender's viewport, that is also possible. That is happening up here. If you grab that down, there's a wireframe option here. If you enable that, it's at 100%. That might be a bit strong, so you can tone down the opacity, or you can tone down the wireframe display. It's sometimes helpful to just have a little bit of wireframe showing there, just so that you can see what you've done there. If you want to look through the body, Shift Z will switch to wireframe briefly, and then Shift Z will switch back. So I haven't found an elegant way to make that that transparent look. I'm sure Blender has it. I just haven't found it. So this is like exactly like I did it in ZBrush. So hold down Shift to smooth this out, then let go of Shift just with the regular draw brush. Bring it back. Bring this out. Get rid of that kink. Shift to smooth this out. Get rid of distortion. Adjust the strength and the size, and just play around with these. Literally draw brush and smoothing brush. Don't worry about anything else for now, because that really gets you started. Once you master those and see what they do, it's going to be a joy to sculpt. Yeah, draw brush and the smooth brush. Smooth brush is Shift, and going out is just left clicking. Going in, Control clicking. That goes in, Control Z. Shift will smooth things out. I think it just switched to smooth there, didn't it? I only did that once. I think that might be a little bug there. Before I have a look at a few questions, let me just quickly show you the other two brushes that I mentioned earlier in ZBrush, which are the ones that can move things around. And that is here, the grab brush and the elastic deform brush. So those are the two that are equivalent to the move brushes in ZBrush. So grab does exactly that. I'll just make the intensity, the strength a little larger so you can see what that does. It goes and moves it in exactly the direction of your brush. So that's handy for certain things. Then elastic deform, same thing. It moves more of the geometry, just like we've seen in the elastic deform in ZBrush. So they really looked at this and thought, yeah, that's the functionality that we need. And once again, this works in conjunction with the other brushes. So once you've made that change, you go back to your draw brush, bring that out here, and go smooth. Smooth where you need. And elastic deform. There's also nudge is another one that you can use. Nudge moves. Nudge is good to even out geometric issues. So like if we had, make the wireframe a little bit more pronounced here. This is a good example of they're stretching here and they're stretching there. If you wanted to even that out, the nudge brush is your friend. That makes that happen. You can thin this out and you can go and it's essentially like smoothing out the vertices. So, you know, if you have geometric stretching, nudge brush is a good one to use. And the final one I'm going to show you with less wireframe is the cloth brush. So Blender has that as well. It's just called the cloth brush. Here it is. And it looks a little larger than the other brushes. And I think it needs to be to get that effect. So you can make funky little wrinkles in your clothing. Sometimes the intensity is a little strong with that brush. Once again, smoothing will smooth that out. Or just go back to the regular draw brush. Pick that out. Cloth brush. Where is it? Cloth brush, there we go. So that introduces wrinkles here. It's not quite as elegant as the one in ZBrush. But again, tons of brushes to play with. Yeah, have fun with this, have fun, and bring these things back into Daz Studio just like we said. Grab this out, put some wrinkles on there. This isn't well done. I'll just leave it as it is. Just to show you this can be brought back into Daz Studio. Back to object mode. Select the shirt, file, export. And trust me when I say repetition really is the key here. I'll call this one pull up BL. Selection only, OBJ, scale 100, geometry, keep vertex order, super important. And then you can go and import it back into Daz Studio. Object or even figure, you know, Morphloader Pro, no worries, same thing. Pull up BL for Blender. And very important here, reverse deformations. So I know it's a lot of steps to remember, but it is, you know, oh, warning, geometry did not match. What happened? And now it happened to me. Usually this is kind of the horror message that you don't want to see. So I must have done something wrong, probably on the export from Daz Studio here. But if you see this, you're screwed. You can either have a look at what the problem was, or do a vertex count and see where things went wrong. But yeah, usually, don't know if it happened from Blender or if it happened from Daz Studio. Kind of nice to see it. It does happen to me all the time as well. Let's see if I've done anything wrong here. It could be. So pull up BL. Anything obviously wrong that I've done here? Yes, probably. Didn't select selected only. There we go. That's probably my mistake here. So should have been selected only. Also scale, I should have said 100. Why is there no keep vertex group anymore. Why, I wonder. File, export, wavefront OBJ. Pull up BL. Under geometry. Keep vertex order. Selection only, scale 100%. That's what I've done, isn't it? I don't get the reference, I'm afraid. Yoshi, I don't get the reference about the rabbits. Why does this not work? File, import, and on a high note, J. Good idea. So, pull up BL. Did I do this? I'm using 100%. Oh, that's important. What am I doing? Edit. Edit Object Morphloader Pro. Man. Reverse deformations. Vertex only. 100%. We're good here. Except and geometry did not match. I'm so sorry. One of those things. Don't know what went wrong. Maybe something on export. Probably. Like we've seen with the skirt woman here, with the dress woman, it did actually work. I don't know why it's not working. Sorry about that. A Looney Tunes cartoon, right. Let me have a look at all your question. Michael says ZBrush isn't free though, is it? No, that is correct. ZBrush is not free. ZBrush costs, you can get it actually, just to show you where that is. You'd think it's on ZBrush.com, but it's not. It's on pixologic.com. It's actually probably not there either anymore. It's now on Maxon, I think. And there's the ZBrush store. That is where you get that. So ZBrush Core, ZBrush Bridge, and there's ZBrush. ZBrush plans and pricing. My goodness. ZBrush, $30 a month. But that's not just ZBrush. Yeah, so pixologic.com. That is where it used to be. It looks like it's somewhere else now. One of those things. If I find the proper link, I will go and let you know for sure. And Mesh Grabber, yes, I think Mesh Grabber, Daja, we're going to go and dedicate a whole different session to, because it's one of those projects. It can be helpful just the same. It works with the same principles, by the way. So it also can make morph targets, but it just works inside Daz Studio. It's, you know, a little clunky to adjust, but for quick fixes, really, really nice. If you want to give it a go, do that. It's quite often on sale, so, you know, do pick it up. Anything else that I have forgotten? Timothy, does the staff picks for Genesis 8 females work on 8.1? I always get confused about what can and what it can and can't do. Good question. So in principle, 8.1 items are usually only compatible with 8.1 figures. So 8.1 goes with 8.1. 8.0 items also go on 8.1. So it's a little bit like there's this backward compatibility, but there's no forward compatibility in there. So an 8.1 shirt, even though it's geometrically the same, isn't going to fit. It isn't going to show up in the smart content as available, but you can manually fit it, so it will work. It's just, you know, some features of 8.1 are only available in 8.1. So if something is made specifically for 8.1, it's probably won't work, or there's a chance it won't work with 8.0. I hope that makes sense. Paulo Rosso asked, how do you save morphs for clothing when in Daz Studio? Well, so yes, good point. So the things that we've created, if you save these out with your scenes, either as scenes or as sub-scenes, they will be available in your scene. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can make one morph and distribute it for other things. So those are kind of the generic morphs that the clothing creators make. And technically, what you need to do is save something as support asset, morph asset, this one here. That is how you do that. but for that you need a special directory structure and you need an empty directory. This is something that we haven't covered. These are all morphs that were kind of in situ for your scenes that you build. If you wanted to share the morphs with someone else, then that is kind of a part for a different session. So in essence, empty directory, save this into that empty directory, and that'll create that hierarchy there, and that you need to then tell your clients to install it into their runtime. So it's very complicated and it would be too much to explain it here. That's another 2-hour topic, but I think there is a video on my channel that explains how to do that with a prop. Thank you so much for dropping by, everyone. It's been a great turnout. If you do have any questions, then do leave them in the comments of this video. I'll be back in about 4 weeks with another Daz stream. I haven't quite decided on the topic yet. If you'd like to see anything specific, then please let me know. We can totally get that taken care of. Thank you so much to all my moderators, Mr. Nate, Mr. Bryant, and Miss Julia, who've been taking care of things behind the scenes. I really appreciate that. Thank you, all of you, for dropping by. Have fun with Daz Studio and go practice. We would love to see what you can do if you share your modifications of clothing in your personal scenes on the Daz Gallery or on social media. Hashtag them with #InTheStudio. That would be lovely to see. My friends, have a wonderful time. Take care. Oh yeah, new title sequence with particles and all. Enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye.